Hello, children and grandchildren. This morning, Grandpa's going to give you your first toolbox with a set of tools in it that should help you not only to repair things or fix things yourself, but also to help friends who might need some help. And you would need to know how to use certain tools. And this is important for both boys and girls. Well, let's get started. And the first item is hammer. This is a small hammer for small nails. They make bigger hammers for bigger nails. But this is for small nails in very simple devices. And you know how to use a hammer. You pound on something, right? Yes, very good. Very good. All right. Now, this is a saw. It is for cutting wood or soft material. You must be careful with this edge because this edge is sharp. Just as long as you're careful with it. Okay? All right. Next item. Screwdriver, large. This is for what's called a common screw. It has a common blade and it's for turning screws like this. And there's an old saying that goes, righty, tighty, lefty, loosey. Can you remember that? That's a funny saying, isn't it? Righty, when you're turning to the right, you're making the screw go tight. When you're turning to the left, it makes it go loose. So it's righty-tighty, loosey-goosey. All right. Now, here is a smaller screwdriver for smaller screws. It is also a common screwdriver because it has a slot. It is slotted. See it? It's been well used over the years. Pliers. These are called common pliers. And they're adjustable. They can go big or they can go small. Aren't they nice and shiny? And they're for holding things tight if you need to hold them tight and you can't hold them with your fingers. Here's a slightly different kind of pliers. These are called gas pump pliers. Now, you would say, isn't that a strange name? And yes, it is a strange name. And it is from way back. I don't know why they call them gas pump pliers, but they do. And they're made in a different way, but they effectively do the same thing. They hold stuff tight when you're working. Now look at this. Look at this. Here, the one I just showed you, and here's another one. Here is another one. And it is the same thing. And it's adjustable. Look at that, how that works. Look at how that works. It works. It is adjustable, but it's a larger version of the same thing. And it's for doing the same thing, holding things very tightly when you're working on them. This is a magnet. Maybe you've never seen anything like this before, but it is a very interesting and very helpful item when you're working. Now, how does it work? It only works with metal. And let me show you how. This is a metal blade. Watch it. Watch it how it works. Look at that. It sticks to it. It gets close. Oh, and it grabs right onto it, almost by magic. Look at that. Isn't that interesting? It's because this is made from a particular kind of metal that is magnetic, and it grabs hold of anything that's metal. Now, let me show you an interesting thing. Look at this. Look at that. And Grandpa can be way back here, and I can reach way out there and get something. It is, and then it can all the way back. Or if you're going to maybe describe something to someone, and you need to point to it, you can use this for a pointer. Like if you were at a blackboard or a whiteboard and you had drawn something on the board and you wanted to point to it, you could. And you could point to it. You could point to it. And so that the people would understand it. All right? Very good. Now, let's see. What else do we have? Oh, here's an interesting item. Here is a very interesting item. Very interesting. Not very big, but it's very interesting. And look at this little hook it has right here. Little hook. It's for opening a paint can. It can't be used for much of anything else, but it can be used to take it down, put it underneath the lid, and pry the lid up. Now, you must be careful because many of these cans that have these kind of lids have paint inside. So you must be careful when you take the lid off that you don't spill the paint. Okay, we will cover painting at some later time, and it will be fun too. All right. Now, this is a pair of wire cutters. They have only one use, just for cutting wire. And see how they come together? Oh, very tight. Very tight. This is a spool. This is a spool of wire. And this is what cuts the wire. See it? It cuts it nice and square, very firmly. Yes. You must always leave on a spool of wire, you must always leave a little bit sticking out, because if it goes back down inside all the way, it's very hard to get hold of the end of it. So that's something to remember. You always want to leave a little bit sticking out, and it won't hurt anything. It will store away very nicely. And here is the piece of wire that we cut off, and it is just the right length for what we want to use it for. Wire cutter. Now, you remember just a little while ago, Grandpa showed you a large screwdriver, a large one. It's large. Note the big head it has on it. It's for common screws, ones with just a slot. Here are its little buddies. These are its little buddies. They are all screwdrivers, and they all have separate uses. Just like the big one was for big screws. Here's a little one. Here is a little one for little screws. And do you know what it's called? What does it look like? What do you think it looks like? It's called a stubby because it is stubby. It's a little short one, nice and short, but it still turns common screws. Now, if you have to get a long way away from the screw, you need one that's real long. And that's what you use a screwdriver like this for. Now, this is funny because there are some screws that don't have slotted heads. They don't have slotted heads. They have a different kind of head. And let's see if Grandpa has any of these in here. Let me see. Let me see here. Oh, yes, Grandpa has some. Grandpa has some. This is called a Phillips head. And I got it out there as close to you as I can so you can see it. Do you see? It has a different kind of head, and it's the kind of head that fits into this like this. Do you see that? Do you see that there? It's a different kind of screwdriver. And it has a name. It's named after the man who invented it. And his name was Phillips. And this is called a Phillips screwdriver. And this is called a Phillips head. Isn't that interesting? And it is very usable. Very usable. Now, here's a different kind of, here is a different kind of screw. It has a slot which this fits into very, very nicely for turning it in and turning it out. Fits very nicely. See how that works? But look at the head. It has what's called a hex head. Can you see it? See that there? It's called a hex head. Now, here's the interesting thing. Here is what's called an adjustable wrench, because it can be adjusted in. Do you see that going in, or out? And it can be adjusted. It can be adjusted to fit a head like this, so that, and Grandpa's going to have to really reach to be able to show you this, so that it fits right around this head like that. Look at that. And then it can be turned using this wrench, an adjustable wrench. And this is the smallest adjustable wrench. It is the smallest one. Now, this is the next size bigger. And then they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until they can be this long, and they're adjustable. Isn't that interesting? All of these tools, you may, at some time, you may use them. But since you're not great big, you use the little ones to start with. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're all done. And Grandpa's going to put these all back in the box for you. Well, Grandpa's so happy to give you your first toolbox with a set of tools that I hope you'll be able to use. And I hope you'll think of me each time you use the tools. But if you forget, you just give Grandpa a call. Grandpa will talk to you anytime. Good morning, dear children and grandchildren and friends of Grandpapa. This morning, I'm going to give you an example and actually give you a toolbox of all of the tools that you should be able to use at your age. And here it is. Isn't it nice? Isn't it nice and pretty? Huh? And it opens. It has a latch. And the first item is something to measure with. Being able to describe size is important. And this is called a tape measure because it's a tape. Maybe you've seen maybe yardsticks or other measuring devices, But this is called a tape measure, and it goes way out, and it has numbers on it which tell you how long something is. Don't you think that's useful? It is very useful in describing the size that a particular tool or something you're working on is, if you're describing it to other people. This, when you pull it out, has a button on it that makes it come back in without pushing it. Isn't that useful? See the button on the bottom. It's right down here, right here, on the bottom. See it? Okay, it's right there. All right, that's our first item. Let's see what else. You know what? Grandpa needs a little sip of something. All right. Now here's a very interesting little tool. It's a tool that has a lot of different things on it. And these are little brushes. Now what would you use that for? Well, let me show you. See this hole here? Do you see this hole right here? What if it was dirty and you couldn't move this? You could take this and you could go in here and you could clean this out, and then it would work just like this one does. And there are different sizes, and they're actually little brushes for doing different kinds of jobs. You may not use these very much, but once in a while you need to use them, and they are very useful. Okay. Now, you remember when we did this. It was for measuring. And this tool actually measures up to 12 feet. Do you see the 12? And the mark there, that means feet. It measures up to 12 feet that this comes out, and then it shoots back in because it has this little lever like Grandpa showed you before. Now, here's an interesting thing. This is also a measuring device. And it only measures just a half inch. This was 12 feet. This only measures a half inch, and it is adjustable in and out. This is called a linear micrometer. Can you remember that name? A linear micrometer. And it is very useful for measuring little things. This is very useful for measuring big things. Now, this is called a ratchet. And it adjusts this way, and it adjusts that way, and it works this way. This is very useful for bolts and nuts. This is very useful for bolts and nuts. And it uses what are called sockets. And the sockets are even color-coded for size. And they fit right on here. Okay? They fit right on there. And here are a whole set. Here are a whole set. And they're each one color-coded. And the ones I showed you go here and here. Now, remember when I showed you these pliers? Do you remember when I showed you these pliers and how they're used for grabbing hold of things and holding them real tight? Okay? Look at this. Look at these pliers. Look at them. Aren't they kind of strange looking? Look at them. Look at them. They're called needle nose pliers because they come very small. If you're dealing with real small things, these are the pliers that you want to use because they're very small at the end. Now, this is called a file. Now, Grandpa only put one in here just as an example of what these do. They are for smoothing metal or wood. And that is what this is for. It's a file. And this is for really rough areas. And Grandpa put it in so that you can see these edges here, which are what smooth. And this particular one is used mostly for wood. Now, from time to time, you have to do things like maybe cut up a cardboard box. And this is what you use. This is what you use. Now, inside here is a very sharp blade. And here's how you get it out. Look at that. See how it comes out and goes back in. This is called a utility knife. And you must be very careful with this. This is used primarily for things like you have to cut something up, like a box, because you want to get rid of it, or you want to open it because you want to get what's inside it. And this is very helpful for that because it gives you a good handle to work with. And the blade that does the work can get stored so that you don't run the chance, or anyone else could get the chance of cutting themselves. Here's an interesting thing too. Remember we talked before about a man called Phillips who had a Phillips screwdriver? Look at what's there. Do you see that screw that's holding it together? Do you see the screw that's holding it together? This screwdriver fits right in there and is used on this tool. This is very useful, but you must use it with care. Now, this has a funny name. This is called a carburetor. This is called a carabiner. And it's for carrying things and putting things together that you would use at one time. It works this way. This unscrews like this, and then this goes back out of the way, and this is just on there, and this will come off. But you can store this on here. Isn't that usable? Look at that. Very usable. Very good. And then you can screw this down and it locks it in place so that it won't come loose, and you can't lose this then. Isn't that useful? Now, this, I'll bet you can guess what this is. It's a little flashlight, and it is very useful. And it turns on and off, on and off. And this is very helpful, at times, as are all flashlights. Yes. Now, look at this. This is also a flashlight. And I won't turn it on because it is so bright. Now, the way this works is it goes on over your head like this. How does Grandpa look with that on there? Huh? Kind of funny. Yeah. Grandpa has it on his head. But when Grandpa can move his head to the left or the right, the light goes right with Grandpa. Right with Grandpa. Right where Grandpa's looking, that's where the light goes. And that is very helpful in some instances. Would you agree? Yeah. Ha! Ha ha! Grandpa messed up his hair. Okay, you know what? We're down to the last item. And it's kind of funny. It's in a case all by itself. And inside this case are these little things. Do you see them okay? These little things which have very specific, they have very specific uses. Very specific. These are specific little screwdrivers for very small things that have different points on them, and they can't be changed out. What is there is what you use. And on this side, Grandpa looks at these and says, "Where have I seen those before?" And I have seen them at a dentist's office. A dentist's office. Look at them. They look like the thing the dentists use, and they are made exactly the same way. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? But once in a while, it's the only thing that works for something that you might be doing. And they're in their own case. Well, we're all done, and Grandpa's going to put these all back in the box for you. Well, Grandpa's really glad that he could give you your first toolbox with a set of tools. I hope you'll remember each time you use the tools or have the toolbox, or if someone asks you, where did you get those? That you would say, my grandpa gave them to me. Now, if you forget, or you have questions, or you're maybe confused about something, well, you just give Grandpa a call. Grandpa will always be here for you to give you help or advice. Hello, children and grandchildren. Today, Grandpa's going to show you a telephone that is 100 years old. This telephone was used when Charles Lindbergh was about to make his flight all the way across the Atlantic Ocean and all the way to Paris. And it's called a field telephone. And here is a commemorative plaque, right here, a commemorative plaque that records the event. There are also some things on the sides that are kind of interesting. I want to show you this. I want to show you this. This is actually a connection that today this can be used like a regular telephone. And we're going to see that in just a little bit. Now, this opens up. It has a lock here and a lock here. And then it opens this way. Isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? Here is a clock. Here is a map. Here is a speaker area where sound comes out. Here is a telephone. And here are all kinds of buttons which Grandpa will explain to you what they are. By the way, this could only be talked to. The people on the ground could only talk to Lindbergh when he was in the United States. When he got over the ocean, he could not talk to anyone. Isn't that interesting? Only when he was in the United States could it be used. But it was very valuable in that segment of his flight. Now, here's a telephone that looks very much like some telephones today, very much like them, but it looks a lot like, exactly like, the telephones from 100 years ago. Now then, look at all these buttons. These buttons were used so that people on the ground could communicate with an airplane in the air. Just so you know, Grandpa worked for the airlines for 33 years. And we had many very sophisticated means of talking with the pilots from the ground. And it worked very well. But it took a long time to get those systems to work, both in the airplane and on the ground. Now, let's look at another feature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, asterisk, 0 pound. When the ground crew that was supporting Charles Lindbergh, when he was flying in the United States, they were interested in knowing how is the engine on the airplane running? How is he feeling? What is the weather like where the airplane is? And he could tell them what his condition was. And everyone would feel secure that everything was going right the way it was. Now, I'd like to show you another feature of this here. This, if you can see this, and it's probably a little bit hard to see, but there are little red buttons here that go across here. That is actually the route that Charles Lindbergh followed in his flight from New York to Paris. Isn't that interesting? And they put that right on this communication device to show where he would be when he left the United States, but he couldn't communicate with the people on the ground once he got over the ocean. Now, I'd like to show you another feature. Right here, and here, and here, and here. Memory. Store. Flash. Radio. Redial. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how they would use this. The people on the ground would have this, and as I showed you before, it's called a field telephone. They would be on the ground, and if they wanted to talk to him in the airplane, they would pick this up and they would push a button here that would perhaps say on off, and they would begin to talk to him. They would speak into this portion of this, and they would listen in this. This goes up to the ear, this goes in front of the mouth. Like this. Mr. Lindbergh would have a similar device in the airplane, and he would be able to talk to them. So he would talk about what the weather was like, or whatever was interesting that he thought they should know. And they would talk to him, and they would tell him or ask him questions about things that they were interested in or needed to know. And that's the way it worked. Let's look at another feature. I want to show you this. This is an on and off switch. And this is also an on-off switch, but it only works in one direction. Let's look at this. This is the speaker volume. This is the ringer volume, so that the people on the ground can know when the pilot wants to talk to them. Now, there was something I actually forgot to tell you earlier. Charles Lindbergh had to have an airplane, of course, and he had this airplane manufactured in California, and then he had to fly it all the way across the United States to get it to New York. Now, this airplane that he had, if you wanted to see this airplane and you happened to be with your parents or somebody later on in Washington, the actual airplane is in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. But interesting thing is that there are replicas of that airplane in many airports around the country. They are replicas of it, but they are full-sized. And they're very interesting to look at. One of them is in the airport in Minneapolis, Minnesota. But there are other ones around the country. I hope you enjoyed my story about the box and about Charles Lindbergh and his flight across the Atlantic Ocean and his airplane. I hope you have a good day. I love you. Goodbye.